I met Grant Eastman and saw his Southern Alberta rail layout for the first time in the fall of 2014. I had seen the SAR in N-Scale Railroading magazine, so I was really excited when I had the opportunity to tack it on to the end of the 2014 Northern Rails operating event. It was a unique operating experience where exquisitely modeled trains were pushed in prototypical manner through outrageously beautiful scenery. From that point, I'd been bugging Grant for an opportunity to come back and videotape his layout, and in April of 2017, the stars aligned and I got my chance. In the first of this two-part video series, we'll meet Grant and listen to his philosophy of how he designed the SAR. In the second video of this series, we'll take a tour over the railroad. Okay, we're at the home of Grant Eastman in Calgary. That's Grant. And we're going to go check out the Southern Alberta Rail layout, the very famous layout. It's been published many times.
Watch your skull, Mark.
Watch the skull. So we're walking down into Grant's basement. Grant, I was fortunate enough to operate on this layout a couple of years ago. It's one of the most unique operating experiences I've ever had, so I've been looking forward to coming back here for quite a while. Grant, I'm going to ask you some questions just about the design philosophy of your layout.
Fire away.
And then ask you to show us your layout. So first, could you tell me a little bit about the prototype for the SAR?
Sure. Basically, what I'm trying to emulate, and it's not a direct copy, obviously, is I'm running across Southern Alberta, thus the name, and into a portion of Southern British Columbia. I'm basically trying to follow CP's Crow's Nest sub, but I kind of change endpoints somewhat just so I could get a little bit of extra operational interest.
That's interesting. And when what's the time frame? What year are we looking at?
This is about 2005, and I might bump it up a little bit newer, but 2005 seems to be the last time that I could run a specific type of stack car, and in N-Scale, that's basically the staple of the stack fleet is this particular car that kind of didn't really show up too much after 2005, so that's kind of why I'm sticking with the 2005 year.
So one of the things I remember very, very well from the operating session was your importance of focusing on prototypical operations. So you seem to be very, very passionate that we follow things like scale speed, crew operations, etc. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your philosophy in that area and what's important to you.
Sure. Obviously, I'm trying to go for the most prototypical experience you can have. I mean, you put all the effort into making your equipment look proper. You're following different. I go off of photographs for a lot of my rolling stock to make sure that it was weathered that day. That's how it looks, etc., etc., etc. So
I'm not shunning you, Grant. I'm just going to give the viewers another experience while you're talking, waxing philosophical.
So if you're going to go to all that work, why wouldn't you want the thing to look the way it's supposed to look? So I'm a big fan of prototype speeds. I have a rule of 40% as well that I try to follow here, where the visible portions of this layout are 40% of an actual mile in how I lay out my mileage markers. My trains also are 40%. So, for instance, a 48-car sulfur train, which is what my sulfur train is, would equate to about, it's about a 120-car sulfur train. Potash train, if I'm running 62 cars, turns into about a 150-car sulfur train, that type of thing. So it's my rule of 40% that I try to follow.
I'll have to remember that 40% as we go through.
Okay.
Now, it's not 37%, it's 40%. Very, very important. I'm sure it's a natural law of model railroading somewhere.
It is a natural law, yes.
The other thing I remembered, other than your fastidiousness for focusing on prototypical operations, was how austere the layout was. There wasn't a bunch of stuff on the front fascia. As you can see, there's no Digitrax plugins, there's no control panels. It's all very, very clean. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your philosophy in that area.
Well, I think that layouts can be and should be part of the scenery of the room, for lack of a better term. So as you can see underneath, it's all bookcases and what have you. And I kind of sold the layout on it. It's basically just covering the books because they're all my wife's books for the most part.
So it's important to keep the other half very happy.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I'm a big fan of like the Art Deco movement and the way architecture can float. And I think that the same thing can be applied to a model railroad. is things can flow and things can blend and things can look the way they're supposed to look, and they can become part of the furniture and part of the scene of a room, and that's what I'm kind of trying to shoot for here.
So speaking of that, we're looking at two very interesting staging yards. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit in terms of how it fits into both the operations, but also your design aesthetic.
Okay, the staging yards themselves are both basic mirror copies of one another, so that you can, on West End and East End, you can do the exact same amount of staging. They're both reverse loops, 3 tracks each, but each track is over about 45 feet long, so you can stage
45 feet long. Wow.
Well, that's so you can stage end to end.
So that's like nearly 100 HO feet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
For your HOers out there that are enjoying this video. I thought we weren't going to mention HO. Well, they do pay the bills, so we've got to focus on them occasionally.
That's true. So this whole area, as you're looking at, you got lower staging, you got upper staging. And this is a transition area here between levels. This is a double deck layout. Obviously, you've seen that in the first part of the video here. But we call this the brain because without this bulb here, this layout wouldn't work. So you have staging in here. You have transitions between levels that happen on this bulb. There's also hidden track in behind here because I have a philosophy on trying to extend length of run by hiding entire train length. So when a train length is 19 feet long, you got to do some pretty creative use of hidden track. And what that does is it's more of a mindset than anything else. If you're at ever an operating session and your train disappears someplace, people tend to panic and time speeds up. So I'm trying to get that to happen subconsciously in people's heads by hiding an entire train, and then I can cover, instead of my 40% rule might become a 10% rule type of thing.
So we're talking with Grant Eastman, philosopher, model railroader, not only on the 40% rule, but also on the need to accentuate panic during operating sessions. Is that a design objective, accentuate panic?
Well, it's not to accentuate panic because, just meeting me tends to make people panic somewhat. But if you can get a train to hide its entire length, people will lose track of time, and it seems to make the run across the layout longer. So on a run from west to east or east to west, on this layout, you would hide once, twice, 3. There's 4 times where your train, up to 25 feet long, can hide itself in its entirety, and that goes from. An example would be, if you look over here, Mark, is if this is milepost 1.8, the train would loop through, and it does a loop inside here, hides itself, but it comes out closer to milepost 18. So I've now covered 18 miles.
A loop behind the stairs.
A loop under the stairs, and there's a dispatch office in behind
18
here. miles,
but times 0.4 is 40% rule, right?
Well, it's not the 40% rule because it's hidden track.
Oh,
so what I've done, I've actually
the 40% rule applies except for hidden track.
Yeah, 40% rule is for track that is visible.
Yeah.
So
there we go.
By hiding a train, you can jump your mileages without actually your train being affected by that, or you don't lose the what would that be? You don't lose the sense of distance.
Right, so this is basically the universal field theory applied to model railroading. This is how we tie 40% with hidden track. So we're going to ask one more question. And we're about the operations, and I'm going to walk around, and then we're going to shoot a train going by. So what's the size of your normal operating crew? How often do you operate? That kind of thing? What does an operating session look like?
Operating session can draw about 12 guys. And when I'm in the mood, we'll do it once a month. I haven't been in the mood for about a year now, but we'll get back into it.
Let's not dwell on that.
That's right. It runs on OCS, and for those that aren't Canadians, OCS is Occupancy Control System, and basically it's a updated version of a track warrant type of situation, where a dispatcher communicates with crews over radios. The entire portion of the sub that I'm modeling is all dark territory. There's no signals, and there's no powered switches, and I find that fascinating, and it also adds to the length of time that an operation takes, because I expect the crews to stop, I expect them to throw switches, the guy's got to get back on the locomotive, you got to pick back up the track speed. The dispatcher has to keep track of which position the switches are thrown so that he can alert the next crew through as to whether or not they got to switch against them or not. And I find that it just adds a slew of interest by having guys stop and not just randomly going around and flicking switches.
So you really have to think
Well,
You're not simply running to
you
light
have
to
to-
light to light.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I really enjoy is I really enjoy the vernacular that railroaders use. So we try to emulate. As
Ooh,
close
vernacular
as
and emulate in one sentence. There we go.
we could try to combine those two words. It might be very awkward though. But I like to try to emulate the language and the tempo that railroaders use when they speak, and the crews are getting really good at it. We're fortunate enough to have a couple of guys that are real railroaders that actually dispatched this portion of track on CP that have come over and they operate regularly as well. And they've really helped out with how you would word this and how you would word that. And you know, it could be something as simple as you place this word in front of this one versus the opposite way around, and that adds to the realism as well. So
I may have missed it. Did you say roughly how many people you have in a session?
about 12, yeah.
About 12?
Yeah.
And if I recall, they're two-person crews, one person acting as a conductor, one person the engineer?
Two-person crews on. There's two wave freights that run one in each direction, so that two, and then there's a switcher that comes in. This is going to be a paper plant eventually. Switcher will come in here. Those are usually two-person crews. If I got a guy that hasn't run here before, I'll give him a conductor so that he's aware of speed limits. There's speed limits in different spots, and they go up and down. So he knows how to use the radio properly, or he kind of gets the feel for it. Because I mean, anyone that's gone to a brand new layout, it can be overwhelming at times. And this one, because of the language, I've had guys that just don't even have fun. And so you got to try to guard against that by not throwing them right into the.
Oh, so it is important that your operators have fun.
It's important I have fun.
Yeah, but reducing them to tears may be fun for you, but not necessarily for the operator. Anyway, thank you very much for all that philosophy, Grant. We're going to cut to some scenes of trains running.